In the vast theater of human personality, there exists a type so rare, so misunderstood, and so profoundly complex that they represent only 2 to 4% of the global population. They are the architects of tomorrow, the strategists behind revolutionary ideas, the quiet masterminds who see patterns others miss entirely. They don't seek the spotlight, yet they change the world. They don't crave social validation, yet their ideas reshape entire industries. They are the INTJs, the masterminds, and their psychological landscape is as fascinating as it is misunderstood. If you've ever felt like an alien in your own culture, if you've struggled to find your intellectual equals, if you've been called too intense or overthinking, you might be looking into the mirror of the INTJ mind. Today, we're diving deep into the psychology of the mastermind, exploring not just what makes them tick, but why they often feel so profoundly alone in a world that doesn't speak their language. To understand the INTJ is to peer into a mind that operates fundamentally differently from the majority of humanity. Imagine a sophisticated pattern recognition system running constantly in the background, a mental observatory that never stops scanning for connections, meanings, and future possibilities. At the heart of the INTJ's mental architecture lies what psychologists call introverted intuition, their dominant cognitive function. This isn't just about being introverted or intuitive, it's about possessing an internal radar that operates at frequencies others can't hear. Picture this. You're in a meeting where everyone is discussing surface-level solutions to a complex problem. While others focus on immediate fixes, the INTJ's mind is 3 steps ahead, seeing the systemic issues that created the problem in the first place. They're not trying to be difficult. They literally can't unsee the deeper patterns. This cognitive function works like a sophisticated filtering system, constantly processing information in the background and synthesizing seemingly unrelated concepts into coherent insights. It's why INTJs often just know things, without being able to immediately explain how they arrived at their conclusions. But this gift comes with a burden. When you see patterns others miss, when you understand systems others find confusing, when you can predict outcomes others can't foresee, you become alienated by your own insight. The very thing that makes you valuable makes you alien. Let me tell you about Sarah. Sarah sits at gatherings, watching conversations flow like a carefully choreographed dance. Weather, vacations, the latest Netflix series. Everyone laughs at predetermined moments, nods in synchronized approval, and the comfortable rhythm of small talk fills the air like background music. But Sarah hears something else beneath this surface symphony. She hears the tremor in Michael's voice when he mentions his promotion, the way it betrays his fear of failure. She notices how Jennifer's eyes dart away when someone asks about her marriage, how her smile tightens just slightly at the corners. She feels the weight of David's silence, the way he retreats into himself whenever the conversation turns to success and ambition. The others seem oblivious to these subtle undercurrents, content to skim across the surface of human interaction like stones skipping on water. But Sarah dives deep with every glance, every pause, every carefully chosen word. She can't help herself. This is the profound loneliness of the INTJ, not the simple loneliness of being alone, but the complex isolation of seeing clearly in a world that prefers the comfort of blindness. It's what psychologist Carl Jung called cognitive loneliness, the feeling of being intellectually isolated, even in crowds. Unlike simple introversion, which merely describes a preference for solitude, INTJ loneliness stems from a fundamental mismatch between their cognitive processes and those of the majority around them. Their dominant function operates at a level of abstraction that can be difficult for others to follow or appreciate. When an INTJ shares their insights about long-term patterns or systemic issues, they often encounter blank stares or dismissive responses from people who prefer immediate, concrete concerns. Small talk feels not just uninteresting, but actively painful, as it represents a form of communication their cognitive system isn't optimized to process or generate. The INTJ relationship with perfectionism represents one of the most psychologically complex aspects of their personality. This isn't about flawless execution in the traditional sense. It's about achieving complete systematic understanding. When they focus on a project, relationship, or area of knowledge, their minds automatically begin identifying inefficiencies, gaps, and potential improvements. Imagine building something that everyone else considers excellent, but all you can see are the 17 ways it could be better. This is the INTJ's daily reality. Their perfectionism creates a psychological state where good enough feels intellectually dishonest, even when external standards have been more than satisfied. This drive for systematic perfection creates several psychological challenges. First, it leads to chronic dissatisfaction. INTJs always see how things could be better, more efficient, more elegantly designed. Even their own achievements often feel inadequate because they can envision superior versions of what they've accomplished. INTJ perfectionism can create paralysis in areas where they lack complete understanding or control. Unlike other personality types who might proceed with partial information, INTJs often prefer to delay action until they have developed a comprehensive mental model of the situation. This can lead to missed opportunities and frustration with their own inaction. But here's what makes this even more complex. Their perfectionism isn't driven by external validation. It comes from an internal need for integrity and competence. They hold themselves to standards that are often unrealistically high, creating chronic stress when those standards aren't met. Beneath the INTJ's composed exterior lies a more complex psychological territory, what Carl Jung called the shadow functions. These unconscious aspects of personality can emerge during periods of extreme stress, chronic imbalance, or personal crisis, revealing behaviors that seem contradictory to their typical rational demeanor. When INTJs are pushed beyond their limits, something fascinating and terrifying happens. The shadow stack begins to emerge, starting with what psychologists call the opposing function. For INTJs, this manifests as extroverted intuition gone haywire. Picture this: an INTJ who normally operates with laser-like focus suddenly finds themselves scattered, considering too many possibilities simultaneously, becoming paralyzed by options. This is a stark contrast to their usual focused approach. Imagine a master chess player suddenly unable to decide which piece to move because they're seeing every possible game state at once. The shadow doesn't stop there. The critical parent function emerges as excessive self-criticism and over-analysis. The INTJ becomes trapped in endless loops of internal critique, second-guessing decisions that would normally come naturally. They analyze their analysis, critique their critiques, until thought itself becomes paralyzed. But perhaps most disorienting is when their trickster function activates. What should be their inferior feeling function becomes hyperactive in all the wrong ways. Suddenly, this typically direct and logical person becomes uncharacteristically concerned with others' opinions, engages in people-pleasing behaviors, or misreads social situations in ways that feel completely foreign to their usual approach. The deepest shadow function, the demon, represents complete unconscious takeover. When this happens, INTJs may become obsessed with past failures, resistant to any change, or fixated on physical discomfort in ways that seem completely out of character. It's as if their entire cognitive system has been hijacked by everything they normally aren't. Understanding these shadow states isn't about pathologizing INTJs. It's about recognizing that even the most composed minds have breaking points, and those breaks often reveal the very qualities they've spent their lives managing or suppressing. One of the most misunderstood aspects of INTJ psychology is their relationship with emotions. Common stereotypes portray INTJs as emotionless robots, but this fundamentally misrepresents their psychological reality. INTJs experience emotions as intensely as any other type. Their challenge lies in integrating emotional information with their primarily logical decision-making process. Think of it this way. While others might experience emotions like listening to music, immediate, immersive, overwhelming, INTJs experience emotions like analyzing a complex symphony. They hear every instrument, understand the mathematical relationships between notes, recognize the emotional techniques being employed, but they process it all through their analytical framework. This doesn't make their emotional experience less valid or less intense. It makes it different. The INTJ approach to emotional intelligence is necessarily analytical. Rather than trying to become more emotionally expressive or intuitive about others' feelings, INTJs develop emotional intelligence by treating emotions as another form of data to be analyzed and understood. For INTJs, emotional self-awareness often comes through intellectual analysis rather than direct emotional experience. They observe their emotional states, identify triggers and patterns, and develop cognitive frameworks for understanding what their emotions are telling them. This analytical approach to emotions isn't a weakness, it's a strength that allows INTJs to develop sophisticated emotional intelligence while remaining true to their cognitive preferences. When INTJs do develop emotional intelligence, they often become remarkably effective at understanding and influencing human behavior. Their analytical minds can identify emotional patterns and motivations that escape others, leading to a form of emotional intelligence that is both powerful and uniquely their own. The key insight here is that emotional intelligence doesn't have to look the same for everyone. The INTJ's analytical approach to understanding emotions can be just as effective as, and sometimes more insightful than, more intuitive approaches. The psychological landscape of INTJs is deeply concerned with questions of purpose, meaning, and existential significance. Their dominant cognitive function naturally gravitates toward understanding the why behind existence, both personal and universal. This creates a personality type that is inherently philosophical, constantly seeking to understand their place in the larger cosmic order. For INTJs, the search for life purpose often begins early and continues throughout their lifetime. Their strategic minds naturally approach this question systematically, analyzing their values, capabilities, and the needs of the world around them to identify areas where they can make meaningful contributions. But here's what makes this search particularly challenging for INTJs. They need their lives to matter not just personally, but objectively. It's not enough for them to feel good about their contributions. They need to know that their efforts produce measurable, meaningful results in the real world. This creates what we might call existential pressure. INTJs often feel responsible for solving problems or creating improvements that extend far beyond their individual capabilities. They carry the weight of seeing systemic issues that others ignore, understanding long-term consequences that others dismiss, and feeling compelled to act on insights that others don't even perceive. The existential concerns of INTJs often center around questions of competence and contribution. They want to know that their lives matter, that their efforts produce meaningful results, and that they are living up to their intellectual and moral potential. This isn't ego-driven, it's a deep need for their existence to have objective significance. INTJs also grapple with questions of legacy and long-term impact. Their natural future orientation leads them to consider how their current actions will influence outcomes years or decades from now. This can be both motivating and paralyzing, as it creates pressure to make decisions based on long-term consequences that may be impossible to predict accurately. The psychological shadow of INTJs reveals behaviors and tendencies that contradict their typical composed, rational demeanor. Understanding these shadow aspects is crucial, not just for INTJs seeking psychological wholeness, but for anyone trying to understand the full complexity of the Mastermind personality. When INTJs are under chronic stress or operating from unhealthy psychological states, they may exhibit behaviors that seem completely out of character. This can include becoming emotionally volatile, engaging in impulsive behaviors, or making decisions based on immediate gratification rather than long-term consequences. One of the most dangerous shadow behaviors for INTJs is the tendency toward intellectual arrogance and dismissiveness of others. When operating from an unhealthy state, INTJs may become convinced that they are the only ones who truly understand a situation, leading to isolation, poor decision-making, and damaged relationships. This arrogance often masks deep insecurities about their own competence and worth. The very people who appear most confident in their intellectual abilities may be the ones most terrified of being revealed as inadequate. The psychological burden of maintaining impossibly high standards can become overwhelming, leading to breakdown rather than breakthrough. Another significant shadow risk for INTJs is the potential for nihilistic thinking and existential despair. Their analytical minds can become trapped in cycles of questioning meaning and purpose, leading to conclusions that nothing matters or that their efforts are fundamentally meaningless. This nihilistic spiral can be particularly dangerous for INTJs because it contradicts their deep need for purpose and significance. When an INTJ loses faith in meaning itself, they lose access to the very thing that motivates and sustains them. The shadow can also manifest as perfectionist paralysis, where the fear of making mistakes or producing inadequate work prevents any action at all. This leads to cycles of procrastination, self-criticism, and increasing anxiety as deadlines approach and opportunities slip away. Understanding these shadow aspects isn't about pathologizing INTJs. It's about recognizing that even the most brilliant minds have vulnerabilities, and those vulnerabilities often stem from the very qualities that make them exceptional. The journey towards psychological integration for INTJs involves developing and balancing their cognitive functions while addressing the challenges inherent in their personality structure. This process requires conscious effort and often extends throughout their lifetime, as INTJs continually refine their understanding of themselves and their place in the world. The development of what psychologists call the auxiliary function, extroverted thinking, is crucial for healthy INTJ functioning. This involves learning to translate internal insights into external action, developing organizational skills, and creating systems that support their goals. INTJs who fail to develop this function may remain trapped in analysis without ever implementing their ideas, leading to frustration and unfulfilled potential. But when properly developed, this function becomes the bridge between vision and reality, allowing INTJs to transform their internal insights into tangible outcomes. Integration of their tertiary function, introverted feeling, represents another crucial aspect of development. This involves developing greater awareness of their values, emotions, and personal needs, as well as learning to honor these aspects alongside their logical analysis. Healthy development of this function allows INTJs to make decisions that are both rationally sound and personally meaningful. They learn to trust their values as a valid source of information, not just their logical analysis. The most challenging aspect of INTJ integration involves developing their inferior function, extroverted sensing. This requires learning to be more present in the moment, paying attention to sensory information, and engaging with the physical world in more immediate ways. While INTJs will never be as naturally comfortable with this function as sensing types, developing it provides important balance and prevents the disconnection from reality that can plague unhealthy INTJs. The goal isn't to become someone else, but to become the fullest, most integrated version of their authentic selves.